It's a great honor for me to deliver the Issls presidential address. The title of my talk is The Inclusive Philosophy of Issls and the Experiences of Two Figures in Wakayama's History. I will discuss two famous people in Wakayama's history, Seishu Hanaoka and Kumagus Minakata. Their experiences and philosophies are consistent with those of the Issls, a society that I feel extremely privileged to be a part of. Where is Wakayama? Wakayama is in the southern part of the main island of Japan. I wish to introduce two noted historical persons who came from Wakayama Prefecture. One is a saintly surgeon, Seishu Hanaoka, who was born at Nishinoyama in 1760. The other is a biologist, Kumagus Minakata, who was born in Wakayama City in 1867. Seishu Hanaoka was a surgeon who developed general anesthesia in Japan. The first time Seishu performed breast cancer surgery under general anesthesia was in 1804. 42 years later, Morton gave the first successful public demonstration of the use of ether anesthesia during surgery in Boston. This is the Seishu's formula for the anesthetic, Tsusensan. However, it is still unknown which parts of these herbs were used. This flower is mandrake, which appears in the school badge of Wakayama Medical University. Seishu conducted animal studies before performing a clinical trial. Many cats and dogs died before he developed the standard formula for the anesthetic. In Seishu Memorial Park at Nishinoyama, my friend urologist Dr. Sawada, who was born here, has worked at his medical clinic. When he was a child, Dr. Sawada's grandfather told him that many blind and paralyzed dogs and cats were seen here during the time of Seishu Hanaoka, whose work required the sacrifice of animals. After completing animal studies, Seishu moved on to clinical trials. He obtained two volunteers, his mother and his wife. He performed several experiments on human beings. As adverse events, his mother passed away during this trial, and his wife completely lost her sight in the experiment. After 20 years' repeated trials, he developed a general anesthetic. The success and scope of Seishu's surgery were directly related to his knowledge of general anesthesia. More than 1,000 pupils were educated at Shunrinkan, which was a private medical school. However, Seishu prohibited his pupils from sharing his technique for making Tsusensan with their families and friends. Seishu did not record his medical knowledge or techniques in any book. This simple question arises. Some of his outstanding pupils published reports of the medical knowledge and techniques learned from Seishu in their medical books. However, they were expelled from Seishu's circles after making his knowledge public. This is a painting of Seishu exhibited at the International Museum of Surgical Science in Chicago. In 1956, Seishu was placed as a pioneer in general anesthesia in the Hall of Fame established at the International College of Surgeons. Through Seishu's experiences, we learned that animal studies are needed before clinical applications and that practical medicine is important. We also learned that practice should not be based on empty theory, but that the original ideas should be published and prevent the dissemination of incorrect information. Seishu also left 8 Chinese characters as a rule for medical providers. The characters 内外合一活物キュウリ. 内外合一 mean that medical providers should not distinguish between Eastern medicine and Western medicine, including surgery, and that they must learn about internal medicine if they intended to be a surgeon. 活物求理 refers to the need to value experiments and practices, and to avoid relying on empty theory. Understanding the basic mechanism of the human body, we should observe the patient carefully and to study the characteristics of the diseases. Considering the management of patients with low back pain, I think the multidisciplinary one team, which includes the range of experts shown here, is needed. Now, we should make use of Seishu's philosophy. Our society, Issls, is only an international society with a focus on applying multidisciplinary approaches for patients with low back pain. I think that Issls members can easily accept Seishu's philosophy. Another outstanding historical person who was born in Wakayama is the great natural historian Kumagus Minakata. The topic of his research were also multifaceted and included biological topics such as slime molds, as well as topics in the social sciences. Kumagus contributed a total 51 theses to Nature, and hundreds of articles and essays to the folklore magazine, Notice and Queries. Through his outstanding work, Kumagus was worshipped as a great scholar, even though he had not obtained a degree. Kumagus was an influential researcher who worked outside of government offices and universities. When he was detained because of anti-slime consolidation protests, Kumagus found a new variety of fungus in his detention cell. Kumagus taught that research and publications based on firm belief are more important than one's position, background, or career. Issls offers a place for the presentation of quality research related to the lumbar spine, regardless of the researcher, their graduate school or institute, whether the work is basic or clinical science, and to members and non-members alike. In 1993, at the Issls annual meeting in Marseille, for the first time I presented my paper on experimental radical pain, which was prepared under the direction of Professor Jim Weinstein, University of Iowa. We demonstrated that ligation of the nerve roots and the dorsal root ganglion in the rat resulted in thermal hyperalgesia, a pain-related behavior. At the same Issls meeting in 1993, Dr. Olmaker presented a very exciting paper entitled Autologous Nucleus Proposes Induces Neurophysiologic and Histologic Changes in Porcine Cauda-equina Nerve Roots. At the end of this presentation, Dr. Steve Eisenstein shouted from floor, "Is the intervertebral disc frozen?" Dr. Olmaker's work and Dr. Eisenstein's shout inspired me. One simple question occurred to me. The intervertebral disc placed on the nerve root induced pain behavior. In June 1993, I returned from Iowa to Wakayama and planned the course of my basic research. First, I used allograft of the intervertebral disc. I found that materials on the nerve root induced pain-related behaviors. When I presented the results at the Issls meeting, someone asked me whether the responses to the allograft itself might have caused the pain-related behaviors. Then I changed to autologous intervertebral discs obtained from the amputated tail. I observed pain-related behaviors after relocation of the materials on the nerve roots and reported the possible mechanisms at the Issls annual meetings. I submitted a paper on the relocation of autologous intervertebral discs obtained from the amputated tail to spine. as well as previous allograft papers which were published. However, the manuscript was rejected. I received a letter from Dr. Ledwig, one of Spine's deputy editors, who said the reason for rejection was that amputation of the tail is against the ethics of the rat. In my work, I have followed the philosophies of two historical figures in Wakayama's history, Seishu and Kumagusu. Using this autologous model, I found evidence of some interesting mechanisms underlying the pain-related behaviors. Although Spine rejected my paper, most of my other papers have been accepted for publication in JOR and CORR. After my presentation at the 2000 Issls meeting in Adelaide, Dr. Kroc asked me about diseased discs. At that time, I could not understand the meaning of diseased discs. Some Japanese members kindly taught me that a diseased disc means a painful or degenerated disc. I learned that Dr. Stock had developed a scoliosis model using a Issls apparatus in the rat tail. At the annual meeting of Scoliosis Research Society, I asked him if I could use the apparatus shown here to induce disc degeneration. Upon approval by Dr. Stock, I demonstrated that a mechanically compressed disc induced more severe and prolonged pain in the rat. After that, most of my papers submitted to Spine were accepted for publication. As shown here, I received many positive as well as a few critical suggestions about my research from eminent Issls members. This encouraged me to continue to study and learn and to continue basic research as well as practicing as an orthopedic spine surgeon. In 2007, I moved to organize the Spine Care Center for the diagnosis and management of patients with spinal disorders. I have incorporated much of what I learned from the Issls into the Spine Care Center. Outcome measures, psychosocial issues, physical therapy, including exercise and surgical treatment, are important aspects of the care of patients with spinal disorders. The results of our research in the Spine Care Center, Wakayama Medical University, Kihoku Hospital, have been accepted for presentation at the Issls. The number of presentations at the Issls meeting is shown here. In 14 years since 1993, 70% of all presentations, including posters, were animal studies. Since I began working in the Spine Care Center, about 80% of the presentation have been clinical studies. Thank you very much for my colleagues and outstanding reviewers of the Issls. Of the two important historical persons in Wakayama, Seishu Hanaoka taught us the importance of completing animal studies before undertaking clinical trials, and the philosophy of patient care as describing as Naigai Goitsu Katsubutsu Kyuri. Kumagusu Minakata taught us about the importance of basing research and publications on firm belief. Issls is an international society that has succeeded at incorporating basic and biomechanical research and patient care through multidisciplinary approaches into clinical practices. Participating in the Issls has introduced me to the future. It has allowed me to direct my science skills into fun and constructive activities. It has taught us to use multidisciplinary approaches at the Spine Care Center to manage patients with lumbar spinal disorders, including low back pain. Dr. Jim Weinstein told me at the reception of Kappa Delta Award of WAOS in 1997, the most important thing is friendship. I believe Issls is the picture of friendship itself. I sincerely appreciate Issls. Thank you, my colleagues and alumni of Orthopedic Surgeons, Wakayama Medical University. Again, thank you, Issls, and for your kind attention.